Hello, I'm Caroline Marshall, and welcome to Bump to Business Owner, the podcast speaking to mums in business, you. I'll be in conversation with some of the most inspiring women and mothers in enterprise about their journey, how they created their successful businesses alongside raising their children, and what that looks like in work and family life. Hello and welcome to today's episode of Bump to Business Owner. I'm your host, Caroline Marshall, and today we're welcoming Claire Gleave, founder of Natal Active and boy mum of 3. After 3 pregnancies, wearing her husband's t-shirts on runs, and then breastfeeding 3 babies while trying to wrestle her boobs out of uncomfortable sports bras, Claire had had enough. She was sick of looking a mess and being uncomfortable, and on realising she couldn't be the only mum out there feeling the same, the Natal Active range became baby number 4. Launching an activewear brand for pre- and postnatal mums in the middle of a pandemic while homeschooling her 3 boys was not part of the business plan Claire had embarked on when she realised her dreams in 2020. From winning awards, being stocked in some major retailers like John Lewis, to being the celebrity and even royal mum's workout gear of choice and achieving the huge milestones of 25,000 sales earlier this year, I cannot wait to hear her story. Claire, thank you. Wow, what a journey you've been on.
Yeah, thank you. That was such an amazing introduction. I think, gosh, are you talking about somebody else?
It's all you. And I'm
Yeah.
literally like, as a boy mum, I'm like, I think 3 is like another level of activeness. So just
Yeah,
insane.
it has its moments, I must say.
Yeah. And so what did you do before? Was your background at all in fashion, in clothing, in products, anything like that?
No, nothing remotely linked to the business now. So I studied journalism at university and actually then went into the dark side of PR and spent the majority of my pre-baby career at Coutts Bank, which was famous for being the then Queen's Bank. I'm assuming maybe now the King's Bank as well. So I was there for probably about 10 years, doing PR
Wow.
and marketing. So very much kind of with a financial services focus, but actually always with a strong focus on marketing to female clients and also marketing to entrepreneurs. So I had a kind of early introduction, I suppose, into many business owners of all different sort of shapes and sizes and industry types. And a lot of female business owners as well, because that was quite a big growth area for the business at the time,
Oh,
which was always
wow.
really super inspiring. I didn't necessarily know that that was sort of going to be my chosen path later in my career. So it's lovely. Maybe one day I'll actually be banking there as well. You never know.
Oh yeah, life goals.
One
A
day.
vision board that. And
Yeah.
yeah, that is, it must have been being around those inspiring entrepreneurs and see, I think when you see it, that must have been probably more of planting a seed than you thought, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. I think you really get a feel for, because it's very easy to look at the sort of end result of what an entrepreneur has achieved. So whether that is a huge exit, which would be the case for many of the entrepreneurs that bank with Coutts, or even further down the line, like you chatting to me today, 4 years on from starting my business and where we are now compared to how it all started. And actually, every business owner has a story about what led them to start their businesses and, what inspired that first seed of an idea. But lots of people have ideas, and the majority of people don't then go on to do something with it. And actually, there's so much hard graft, whether you run a really tiny business or whether you run a really big business, there's a huge amount of work that goes in the background. And so, having a real awareness and understanding of people's stories was massively inspiring.
Wow. That is so true because I think, like you said, I know plenty of people who've had great ideas or I'm going to do this and it just never comes to fruition. Or I think people kind of start it and then the reality of the consistency to keep going
Absolutely.
is like
Yeah,
complete
absolutely.
when it's not exciting anymore or making you the millions straight away you thought it might.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Or
Yeah,
any
that's always a
money.
challenge. Yeah, yeah, or anything at all. Absolutely.
You aren't our first. So, had you always planned to work, have a structured career from there? Because you're not our first mum who worked at Coots, weirdly, on the
I
podcast.
know.
And you
Yeah,
actually
I
know each
know.
other, which is really
We
nice.
do.
And so do you think that sort of career would have worked with how your life now or has been the past few years with babies?
It's difficult to say because I think when I had, so my eldest is 13 now. So when
Oh,
I went on
wow.
maternity leave with him, the whole world was very different in terms of flexible working and remote working. So, as an example, we lived in Oxfordshire, in Banbury at the time, and I commuted into London. And we had an office in Oxford at the time, and I really had to battle to work 2 days a week out of the Oxford office, which
Oh,
they did
wow.
allow me to do. But I mean, working from home just was not a done thing. And so I actually left Coots at the end of my second maternity leave, partly because I, there was an opportunity that came up. They were doing some restructuring, and there was an opportunity that came up that was a job I probably ordinarily would have loved to have gone for, but it just wasn't feasible for me to be doing the hours and the commuting that would be required to do it. And so I was fortunate enough to be able to take voluntary redundancy at the end of my maternity leave. And that kind of just worked out timing wise really perfectly. But I think maybe now there would be more flexible opportunities to pursue something like that than there were, 10, 11, 12 years ago. So,
Yeah, it's really hard to know because I think I get a lot of that on the podcast, or I think things might be better now. And I think, yeah, in some industries and then in other industries, they're really pushing hard for it to go back to the old way. And it's
yeah,
still that brick
definitely.
wall, I think. So it's just continued effort to make over the next few years, I guess. But like you said, to
Yeah.
have to fight for 2 days in an office.
I know, exactly. And it seems ridiculous now, but it just seemed very normal then. It was having to make a business case and what have you, and that was just what you did. Whereas now that just seems crazy, like you couldn't imagine it really. So, it's been a huge sea change, and it's really positive for women in sort of corporate careers because there is a huge loss of talent and skill that comes when women have babies because if they typically many would like to go back and work more flexibly. And if that option's not available to them, in the case of myself, and I imagine maybe Maria, although Coots, to be fair, were always very good and, in terms of their female employee base.
Yeah, and I
But
don't think she was
you,
there at that point. She went somewhere else afterwards. So
yes, she
yeah,
did
yeah.
actually. I do remember
So
that. Yeah. So,
yeah.
yeah. So it kind of, it's just really variable, like you say, as to the company and the industry as well.
Yeah, it's exactly that kind of thing. And I think they're saying now it's like not a gender pay gap, it's a maternal pay gap. It's like they're
Yeah.
doing really well at like, getting equality in graduate schemes, things like that, getting women into finance. And then the gap falls when we're like a lot of women now, I think the average age is after 32 to have babies. So then it's
Yeah.
like
Wow.
you've primed your career and then it's like, oh,
Yeah,
what's happened?
exactly. Exactly. And
Yeah.
that's a lot of skill and experience that's lost if you can't make that work, on both sides of the equation. So
Mm.
it's a difficult problem to solve, I think.
Yes, thank goodness I'm not trying to solve that problem,
No,
just
same.
trying to help awareness. So have you always, we in the bio it talked about your running and want continuing it throughout all your pregnancies and things. So has running always been part of your life then?
Yeah, since I was in my early 20s, really, it sort of started with a bit of a drunken bet after watching the London Marathon. My boyfriend, who is now my husband, was running it. And I sort of said, oh, yeah, I'll give that a go next year. And I was not a runner at all and decided I was going to do it. And actually, working for Coots was really good because you had a lot of opportunity to join sort of charitable places within the marathon. So, which is why I'd ended up doing it so many times while I was working there. But yeah, so I did it the following year and just really got bitten by the bug and have then run, ever since. So probably a good
Wow.
20 something years now of running. And yeah, I just love it. And I was able to continue it to different extents in my pregnancies. Every pregnancy is very different. And I certainly found that. But my last pregnancy, I was running to about 37 weeks, probably more of a plod actually by that point. But, I was keeping going and just, it was, it's always been exercise has always been quite a big part of my life, really important for me for just physical and mental well-being. And so I was keen to kind of keep that up in whatever way was comfortable with the babies when I was pregnant. So when I couldn't run anymore, I would do things like spinning and swimming. It's just very much, I don't know, it's kind of very much second nature to me, to be honest.
Do you think it's like keeping a little piece of you? So like what I, especially with your first, I think that's the hardest part of it. Like, identity crisis. Who am I? Like everything changes from your body type to like no matter what in pregnancy, your body type
Yeah.
changes, even if you kind of feel better afterwards. Everything kind of changes. And I think if you can continue something that is yours, it's like makes you feel a bit you.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely a big part of that. And I think also just getting a little bit of headspace, particularly I had my three children, there's 4 years, just over 4 years between all three of them.
Wow.
And it's very full on. Like, I mean, it still is now, but particularly when they were very little in a
Hmm.
different way. And actually, that sort of hour where you can just go out and just clear your head. And I mean, I know we haven't had a brilliant summer, but even to just get out in the weather now, where if it's not raining, it's a lovely feeling. And yeah, I think it's just really important to, whatever your interests are, but to just try and carve a little bit of time for yourself.
Yeah.
As a mum, particularly, I was a stay-at-home mum for a good 5 years, and it's very, very intense, and so you do lose yourself in
Yeah.
that process a little bit. So it's one thing you can kind of cling on to.
Wow. Reflecting on that time as a stay-at-home mum, how was that? Because that's quite a long time, 5 years. Like, I'm a worrier and I would have been like about my career kind of thing. But
Yeah, it was tricky. I mean, I did sort of little bits of work in between, so I wasn't completely not working, but I was predominantly not working. So I did a little bit of work in my husband's company a couple of days a week for about 6 months, and then I took on a project for someone that I'd worked with at Coots as well at one point. But largely, I wasn't really working, and it wasn't really. It just sort of worked out like that. We moved house. I had a third baby, and actually it was easier to in some ways to be at home, and actually I
yeah,
wanted that as well. It's very different for everybody, and so there's no, certainly from me, no judgment on what anybody chooses to do. But for me, I felt very much when they were young, I wanted them to be with me. I still feel like that now, but obviously now they're all in school, so it's a little bit different. But I wanted that time with them. That's not to say I found it easy. There were times when I found it really challenging, because I did, in hindsight, particularly, I feel that I kind of see it looking back now since starting the business over the last few years. I did very much lose me, in the sense that I had always been so career driven, and it was such a huge part of how I defined myself, that I did struggle sometimes with what I saw as maybe sometimes the meniality of being at home, and suddenly, your job is doing the ironing and doing the laundry and cooking dinner. I mean, those are still things
yeah.
I largely do. I just also run a business at the same time. But
It's kind of easier to do them when, well, harder time-wise, easier to do them when it's not feeling like that's your main job. I think that's the
yeah,
hard part if you're a
exactly.
stay-at-home mum. It's also asking for help, I can imagine, is hard because you're like, well,
Yeah,
it's my job kind of thing.
exactly. And we were very lucky. We would have a cleaner and stuff come in, so it's not like all the drudgery, I would feel like, was all on me. But I look back now, particularly even when I had the times when it was difficult with the kids when they were little, just in terms of my adjustment to that period, rather than finding them particularly challenging. But I look back now and I think, gosh, I was so lucky to have that time. I wouldn't trade it for the world. It was hard, but it was amazing, and we had so much fun together. We did so much, and I love that I've had that time with them. And they are my priority in everything, really. And I was really lucky that I was able to have that time, because not everybody has that opportunity. If you've got to go back to work, then that's what you have to do. And for some people that's what they want, and for some people it isn't. So actually, to have choice is hugely fortunate. And I look back particularly now, especially because they grow up so fast.
Me
And I
too.
look back now and I just think, gosh, I'm so glad that I had that time with them. Like I
Yeah.
say, I was very lucky.
But I think bringing up an excellent point, obviously the privilege of that, but I think the point of like adjusting from career woman, I always think this is huge adjustment, especially if you've had quite a
Yes.
privileged upbringing where it's like, go have a career, do this. They're not telling you to have babies at school.
No, no, that's true.
And then it's like, oh, I did all of this. And now it's kind of like, I think to really, it's such confidence to lean in into like, right, I'm going to do the whole motherhood thing and, address what I do later. I think that's such confidence because I don't think I've ever really had that.
Yeah, I think I definitely felt I think there was also some resentment in there as well. I think certainly when I look back, I think you I don't know if you feel the same or others, but I felt a bit like I'd been sold a lie. This
Oh,
whole idea
definitely,
that you
yeah.
can have it all and it's really great. And it hadn't, when I hear people now talking about, oh, sit down before you have your babies and figure out with your partner how it's all going to work. And we didn't do any of that. We were just going to have babies. That was just the plan. And we didn't sort of think about the logistics of any of it. It was just
Mm.
what you did once you got married. And actually I did sort of feel like, well, actually, I have been sold a lie here because both of us can't work really full on without, bringing in like a nanny or something like that. My husband's business, he ran his own business, and that was really taking off sort of after my eldest was born. So there wasn't the option for him to be as flexible as he now works super flexibly and is very hands on with the kids. That wasn't really an option when my eldest was little. And
And that's
so,
quite often the case because they're not necessarily a senior or established or something like that. Like my husband is way more flexible now than he was when we first
yeah.
had our kids. I think that's really common.
Yeah, and again, I think it comes back to times have changed in the last sort of 10, 12 years, where that is just normal. I do the school run, I tend to do the pickup, my husband takes them to school. There's loads of dads on the school run, but I bet 10 years ago you wouldn't have seen that. So
Yeah.
there is a difference from that point of view. But yeah, so I think very much this whole idea that certainly through my 20s was the real message of, you'd see, I can't remember the lady's name, but she was hugely successful fund
Oh,
manager that had like 6 children, Nicola Horlick, I think. And
yes. No, I think
and
I've
you think,
read an
gosh, I could.
article on her.
And I mean, hats off to her. She achieved some unbelievable things. But there was that sort of feeling that everyone can have that, and actually, without bringing in a significant amount of help, you can't.
Yeah.
That's the reality of it.
And the reality of it as well is like we had briefly a part-time nanny and then she left to get her dream job came up. She left, it was in like cooking and it broke my child's heart. And I was like, I can't do this again. And I no
Yeah,
respect to anyone else, but just for how my child was, what I saw, I just felt
yeah,
I have to make flexible working and wraparound care work. This is
yeah,
we're not doing this again and just babysitters and establish some
yeah,
hopefully some local babysitters. But it is that thing I think because my mum was a full-time working single mum. My stepmom worked full-time. My husband's mum worked full-time all in-house jobs. And I'm like, oh, well, if they can do it, that's how
yeah.
it's just I'm not working hard enough if it doesn't work. And I think it was sold a lie, the reality of what that looked
Yeah,
like.
I know, I know. It's a huge challenge, and every there's so many different configurations of how you make that work, and
Mm,
different things work for different people. And for
yeah,
me personally, I wanted to be the one that's taking my kids to school and picking them up. We did have an au pair for a time. We had two different au pairs when the boys were very little, who were lovely girls, but very much a big sister role rather than full-time childcare. So an extra
yeah,
pair of hands. When I had that was when I had the third, just because my husband was sort of working so much, and it just meant I had a bit of extra help. And that was, again, really fortunate to have that. But it kind of gave me that halfway between just having, it's almost like having your mum over, except you don't want your
yeah.
mum to come over every day and be doing everything. So you can kind of give her jobs to do, but, sort of help with the kids as well. So, that was really lovely. But certainly for me, I predominantly wanted to be the one that was the caregiver for the kids. So you have to,
Mm,
something's
yeah,
got to give when that's
it
the
does.
setup.
And that whole apparently I saw Rachel from Cora Kids saying recently that the au pair option is getting less and less because of Brexit and other things
Yeah,
happening. So that is another childcare option that isn't an option at the minute for people, which is
yeah,
quite an interesting one because, like you
yeah,
said, it means that while there's other things that are positive, that's another impact along with the whole rising cost of childcare is that
yeah,
what was a good
absolutely.
option like 15, 20 years ago was au pairs, and that's not a thing or becoming less common now,
Yes,
which was
yeah.
interesting when I read that. And so Natal Active, when did the seed start to come?
So it really started probably after I had my first baby because I was hugely frustrated with the lack of breastfeeding clothes that were around. So I mean, the only option really then, so again, going back, 13 years, you could go to mother care, and I think Seraphine had some things, and they were all just, either not very nice, or they were hand wash only. If you had something that was a bit more expensive, and it just was very impractical, and it was really frustrating. So I had started, um, and going a bit back to your point earlier about lots of people have a seed of an idea and then sort of get so far and don't do anything with it. And that was exactly me. So I started working on some designs, and some ideas, and contacting some manufacturers because I thought there's got to be a gap for this. But then I had my second baby 18 months later. So they're very close together, the first two. And it just kind of fell by the wayside. The frustrations were still exactly the same, but I just wasn't in a headspace to be thinking about starting a business. And
One to two is a big shock, isn't it? With how much
yeah,
time and space you have, isn't it?
exactly. It was just very full on. And I think when because the sort of the gap, I still felt the gap was there. And then I was sort of thinking as well, it's really frustrating when I'm doing all this exercise in my pregnancy. I'm buying some Nike leggings that are a size bigger, but they keep falling down and they're still really expensive. And then, like you said in your intro, trying to breastfeed with a sports bra on, because I was really lucky.
No.
Like no, it was a nightmare. We had our local gym had a creche, or we've lived in two different houses since having the kids, and both our local gyms had a creche, which is an incredible facility for mums, and every gym should try and have one. But
No, I
you'd
was
sort of go
very
to the
lucky with
cafe.
my second and had that, and I was like, two
Yeah,
hours to
I know,
sort my life
exactly.
out.
It is amazing. But going to the cafe afterwards then and trying to breastfeed with the
Oh
sports bra
yeah,
still on was a bit of a nightmare. So I kind of had the ideas, but it wasn't really till my youngest was coming up to the time where he was about to start school. I thought, right, now I've got to start thinking about doing something, because what do I do all day when they're in school? No one told me how quickly a school day goes, but because it flies, there isn't any time
it
at all,
really does.
really. But I thought, okay, I need to go and do something. And so I then kind of started the ball rolling earlier in that year. So he was starting in September 2019. And I got some breastfeeding things made up. I was approaching manufacturers, but I was then also looking at maternity wear and had an idea for kind of support bands built into maternity leggings and stuff. Yeah, and I think sort of had a good chat with a friend, because I was like, I can't really do both. I either go down a focus on breastfeeding or a focus on activewear. And she said, well, look, you love, exercise, you're always doing stuff, and that it makes sense for you to run a business based on the back of something that you love doing. So that was then the decision that I made, and I'm really glad I did, because I am really passionate about it. And not that I'm not passionate about breastfeeding, and obviously we still have breastfeeding clothes in the range, but exercising in pregnancy and beyond is something I know a lot about as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was then how that sort of developed from there. So I started approaching manufacturers and designers, because although I can draw on a piece of paper, I'm certainly
I was going to
not a
say, were you
designer by
properly
any.
designing
Yeah,
or?
I am not. No, like honestly, some of my drawings are just absolutely embarrassing.
Oh, I
But
hope you've kept
but
them.
yeah, I have. Oh yeah, I have. But they're very much yeah, you have to kind of use some imagination to see how they're actually going to work out. But then I started sampling with a few different manufacturers and narrowed it down then to the two that I still work with to this day, making lots of mistakes and wasting lots of money along the way as well, but with a view to then really cracking on with it in September to launch in early 2020 was then the plan.
Wow. And so you said wasting lots of money, which is quite normal, especially in product businesses. How
Mm.
did you bootstrap it? Did you get any investment like from friends and family? How did that work?
No, I had quite a big redundant no, a reasonable redundancy payoff from Coots when I left.
Right.
So I had put that aside and hadn't used it, and used that then to fund the business. So,
Yeah.
or a chunk of it. So I put, I think maybe from memory, about £20,000 in. And then I took out a small business loan as well. I also got a startup grant through the local government that you could do. I'm trying to think what it was called, but I did like a startup course, and that then
Amazing.
gave you £2,500 grant, and paid towards things like laptops and iPads and bits and pieces that I need. And yeah, and then took out an enterprise loan as well to sort of help pay for more stock once the business started trading, and we had the need for more stock, and just I needed obviously the cash to be able to buy stuff. So that was kind of how I bootstrapped it in the beginning, and then because I run the business through Shopify, you actually have access to Shopify Capital. So I used probably taken out over the period maybe 3 or even 4 Shopify loans, which are now all paid off. So I've used that to kind of give myself working capital over the last few years, and I'm now in a place where I'm actually just trying to build the cash back into the business without having to repay any loans, and sort of be able to grow it a bit more organically like that. So that's, yeah, I haven't at any point yet taken on any investment. It's all been myself at the
That's
moment.
amazing, but you've been really like as well as your own investment. It's like using like local money that's available to you, loans that are available to you. So that's always
Yeah.
really helpful stuff. I think people don't realize there is some money there that can help.
Yeah, absolutely. I would recommend it to anyone starting out. Actually, look at like so I'm based in Worcestershire, and the Worcestershire Council have access to there's all sorts of support out there for small businesses. You just need to know where to look. I mean, even the Department of International Trade, they give you grants for marketing internationally as well. So I've done
Oh
a piece
wow.
of work with them to target the Irish consumers, and I think I got something like €6,000 for marketing in Ireland.
Amazing.
There's a process that you have to go through in order to get that money, but
Yeah.
there are pots of money out there for small businesses to access, but you've got to know to look for them, and lots of people don't.
Yeah. That's such helpful advice. And so when you were launching 2020,
Yeah.
something hit during that year
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
might have changed things. How did that look like? Did it change anything for you? Do you work like we've had some clients that said their business was booming, it was just the struggle of managing people, or was it like, this isn't going to work in a pandemic?
Yeah, it was. I mean, certainly the plan of starting a business when all the kids are at school went out the window, very much so.
Yeah.
But my plan had been to launch in about the February. So my clothing was all in production, and my manufacturers are based in China. And they obviously shut down first. And then by the time they started up again, we were in lockdown here. And I did have, many conversations with my husband where we were like, this is crazy, should I be doing this? Because I was homeschooling 3 children,
Wow.
and that was no mean feat.
I was to say, what was that like? Were they all of school age and need to be
They were
homeschooled?
all of school age. So my youngest was in reception. I always liken it a bit to childbirth, because you forget how you forget the bad bits, I think,
I
looking back
think
on
there's a
it.
lot of that with COVID, and when I really ask someone and they're like, it was awful.
Yeah. I think
Like,
my kids say to me even now, "Oh, we really loved mummy school because you used to give up at lunchtime." I was like, "Oh, thanks, kids." But I think really, it was just more me putting pressure on myself, trying to get a paragraph of writing out of one of the kids, which would they it's a it's such a different setup to if you properly homeschool. We were trying to
yeah,
replicate school at home, and it doesn't really
yeah.
work. But we muddled through as best we could. And actually the children were all of so they were then 4, 7, and 9, I think. And
Wow.
so they were all of an age. Yeah, my eldest turned 9 during COVID, but they were all of an age where they were quite happy to be at home. They were all really good company for each other, so they didn't miss their friends so much because they had each
Oh,
other to play with. And actually, we had some really great fun together as well. So as much as it wasn't always easy, again,
yeah.
it was a really lovely time. But yeah, so my clothing was already in production, and I had paid for everything. So I thought, well, I'm
Oh,
just
wow.
and I'd already started building my social media in anticipation of launching in February, March time. So I thought, well, I've kind of told people it's coming, and I'm starting to build this social media presence, and I've paid for the stock, so I may as well just go for it and see what happens. Not really realizing that actually, for many businesses, I feel awful saying this because for so many businesses, COVID was absolutely horrendous. But for me and an online activewear business, it was incredible because everybody was at home shopping online, exercising at home, and
Yeah.
buying leggings. So
And that's what
really, what
pregnant women would live in, isn't it?
I know,
You don't
absolutely.
have to go to work
And it
necessarily.
was
So,
unbelievable. I'd watched these sales coming in and I was thinking, oh my God, like this was not what I'd expected at all. So it really took off. Sort of hence me having to borrow some more money to get more stock because I'd obviously started with really small
mm,
quantities because I didn't know how well things would sell. And yeah, I largely just focused on social media at that time, and I was doing all the dispatch myself from home. And it wasn't so huge that I couldn't manage it at all. So it just worked quite well and just kept it ticking over in that year. Um, and then it sort of, I think sort of after lockdown, there was a bit of a peak as well of sales. And then it sort of went slower. 2022 was quite tough, but it's kind of plateaued now at a good place. And we've stayed fairly consistent over the last 18 months in terms of sales. So,
and are you
you
still
just
in John
find your
Lewis
place.
as well? Have you still got
Yeah,
stockists?
so no, so we're coming out of John Lewis now. They've got a few things left, but not very much. So that kind of came about because also where in COVID, a lot of celebrities were exercising at home and loads of them were pregnant. So I was really fortunate to get quite a lot of celebrity support, and that obviously really ramped up the profile. So that was how John Lewis came to find us really early on. I mean, they approached me, it was within the first 6 months, but it took about a year, I want to say maybe a year before we were actually stocked with them. But they are obviously having issues of their own and making their own changes now as to the
Yeah.
brands that they stock. Although we're in the process of launching, hopefully, in the next few weeks on another platform with another big retailer. So
Oh,
there's other
exciting.
opportunities that actually probably work better for my business as much as John Lewis was incredible and I happily continue to be stocked with them. Um, the business model makes it probably, I would imagine, they're huge, but maybe a bit more difficult for them, but also for me as a small business because you're having to provide a lot of stock up front
Yeah.
and and waiting, many months to get payment for that, which is very difficult as a small business for cash flow. Whereas a lot of other big retailers are now moving to more of a marketplace platform. And drop shipping in with those sorts of platforms is a
Yeah.
much better setup for us because it just allows us to just have much more flexibility with stock levels and cash flow while also bringing the brand to a new audience. So yeah, there's more coming later this year.
That's a real reality, isn't it? Or, so many small businesses out there would be like, John Lewis, yes, please. And that is
Mm,
the reality. You haven't made it once you're stocked in a major retailer and the other pressures it
no,
brings. So I thank you for sharing that.
yeah.
And so you briefly mentioned, yeah, I mean, the celebrities you've had endorsing your brand is
Mm.
incredible. That is again other brands' dreams as well. Did you do gifting or anything like that? Was that a strategic move, or they literally found you and were just like, in love
Um,
with the brand?
yeah, so I started off initially, so I wasn't paying for any marketing support in the first, you know, 4, 5, 6 months. But I approached some just on Instagram, in DMs. And I think the really sort of big celebrity that made a huge difference for me was when Rochelle Humes wore my stuff. And actually, and I only tell this story now because she's moved house, but I actually Google stalked her and found her address on a planning application. So the week that I launched the business and I had the stock, I made up a box and sort of guessed her sizes and made up a box with some products in and sent it off. And that was in the June. And I just thought, if it comes to nothing, it comes to nothing. I'll just try. And then in the October, she was about to have no, it can't have been her first baby. I think it was her third actually. But she was about to have her baby, and she took a photo, like a selfie in the mirror, and she was wearing one of my bras, which is quite distinctive. And by then, I had such a good following. Loads of people, although she didn't tag me, lots of people tagged me and said, "Oh my God, I think that's one of your bras." So that was super exciting. But then she then went on to order some kit from us herself. So you can imagine I was on the
Amazing.
school run and get the Shopify ping, and it was like Rochelle Humes' place. And I was like, oh my God.
That would be
ringing all
so
my
exciting.
friends.
I'm sorry.
It was super exciting. It was amazing. And she then did some stories on her Instagram when she had the kit as well. So, I mean, my website absolutely blew up and the sales just kind of went huge. So that was, that was a real moment, as was when Vogue Williams wore some of my stuff just after she'd had her baby, actually. And I had got to know her PT at the time. So that was kind of how that came about. And that again was another really huge moment for the business. And at that point, I then took on a PR agency to help with some of that celebrity side of things because it isn't as effective now, but it was a real peak time for influencing, I think. So as
I
a
can
small
imagine in
business,
COVID, especially for a
oh
brand
yeah,
like yours, but it's still a
it was
testament
massive.
to what you did. So, obviously you did the hustle bit of like stalking who would be a good
Mm,
fit and finding how to get your stuff to them, having an excellent brand. So she wanted to come back and buy from you, and
yeah.
then using your relationships for the Vogue one. So I think that's like three really key points for people like, and it is timing. There's that element that you add to it as well,
Yeah,
kind of
there
thing.
is. And actually now, I mean, I don't use a PR agency anymore because I've been trying to bring costs in a lot more over the last 18 months. But I do still get celebrities wearing my stuff, and sometimes it's a little bit hit and miss. You might send something and you never see it again, and other times you do.
Yeah.
I can't afford to pay people, so I am reliant very much on gifting and then their goodwill if they want to do something with it. But actually, people are usually really receptive if you approach in DMs, and I'm always really mindful of how to do it. I'm not one of these people that's very in your face, bolshy, putting myself out there, but I'll just send a polite message and maybe I'd follow up if I felt it was appropriate. And if something comes of it, great. And if it doesn't, then it doesn't.
Yeah, and I like to think there's a little bit of the respect on their side, the awareness of small businesses that you just don't have stock. If you're
Yeah,
gifting it, it's got to
there is
help
a bit of
you.
there is a bit of a mix, shall we
Oh,
say, because you get some people that are absolutely amazing, and then you get others who I wouldn't ever name names, but
you can
make
do
you
that
think,
off
yeah,
when
yeah,
we stop
off
recording.
exactly. But they will make you feel like they're going to do something with it and would like more and more, and you think, oh, okay, I'll send some more, and then it never sees the light of day, and that's quite frustrating because although you don't have a contract and you're not paying, and so
Yeah,
arguably they're not obliged to do anything, there is a bit of an element of don't keep asking for a small business to give you more if you're not genuinely going to kind of do something with them. I totally
yeah.
get it if you've just been sent something randomly, or you might have just been sent a one off thing and you don't use it. That happens. That's not a big deal. But I have had a couple of people that I've sent quite a significant number of items to on their request. And then it's never been used. And that's really frustrating because again,
Yeah,
I don't know. I think now I'd probably be a little bit more pushy, but I
yeah.
find it's difficult to say, hang on a minute, come
There's a
on,
little
can you
bit
do something now?
cringe on their side, if I can say that. And it's also, I
Mm,
think there is, while I do think this is awareness of small brands, I think there was another clothing brand targeted at pregnant people, and they seem really big online. And you are big
mm.
brands, but you're not a big brand. As in
No,
you're a small business. And I think there's that real lack of understanding with some people that because you've got a huge following and amazing
yes,
brand doesn't mean you're a big brand. I think
yeah.
that's the difference, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think, I've spent a lot of money at the beginning getting very professional photography done. I think the website looks really good. And yeah, you get that even sometimes if you have a customer complaining that they haven't, I mean, I'm trying to be
Yes.
very hot on customer services, but they haven't had something in time or they can be a bit abrupt. And I'm like, actually, I'm kind of doing this on my own. And so I'm trying to
Yeah.
get back to you as quickly as I can. And then, oh, I didn't realize, I thought you were really huge. And so, I try to communicate to the customer base, that we're not teeny. I suppose maybe we are quite small, but we're certainly by no
You don't
stretch a
have a
big
customer
brand at all.
service team sat
No,
there.
no,
Not
it's
that it's
me just
okay
on a
to speak to them.
no, but it's just literally me on a different email address, and that's what always makes me laugh. People think, oh, it's the customer services team. I'm like, no, I use three different email addresses for different communication.
That's great. So if anyone listening and ordering, be nice to Claire when you
Yes.
message her on the other
Yeah,
email.
exactly.
And that's a really good point because there's something we were talking about over email that ties in nicely was like, were you thinking about scaling it to have more of a team? And it sounds like you've made a decision not to. What has that journey looked like about the growth on your side?
So I think during COVID and that sort of immediate aftermath, it grew so quickly. And I had a friend that came and worked for me then because I just couldn't manage the marketing and the dispatch and the customer services and everything myself. So I had a friend that came in and she was probably doing 20 hours a week and supporting the business in that way. And I had an ad agency and then I had a PR agency. I very much wanted to predominantly outsource than necessarily have employees,
Love
just
that. I'm all
because
about
they,
outsourcing.
yeah. I just, the commitment to having employees
Yeah.
wasn't necessarily some, it's also something I didn't really feel like I needed. So my friend, she had other jobs as well, so she was effectively self-employed, so she was effectively a freelancer, and then I outsourced other elements of the business. And she then was with me, I'd say for about 18 months, but she was then offered a full-time job and had decided to go into that, which was absolutely fine. But I was also getting to a point because we were still fulfilling everything from my home office, and we're just sort of taking over the upstairs, like top floor of my house a bit. And there is something of, although I'm still working from home, hence the very dull background here, but although I'm
Or it
still
could
working
be
from
your
home,
toy room. So whichever
it
yours
could,
is
yeah,
either
it could be
dull
anything. Yeah,
or a
yeah,
mess.
that's true. That's true. But I think, it's much harder to switch off. And as much as she was a really good friend, and we're still very good friends, you're having somebody in your house every day. And so I kind of used that opportunity when she chose to leave. I was looking at whether I brought somebody else in, and I thought, you know what, actually, I think I want to put everything into a warehouse now and get it dispatched
Yeah.
for me. So that is what I then did in the summer. And everything then got moved to a fulfillment warehouse, which we've had some teething issues with.
Yeah.
And we may make a move later this year, but it largely has been okay. It's always difficult because you're letting go. But what that's then meant is and like I said earlier, I've been trying to pull costs back. So actually, my background is PR. I know how to do PR. I may not have the relationships that, I did use a really great PR agent, a freelancer. She was fantastic, just couldn't afford her anymore. And so I now do my own PR, and I have access to certain, all the sort of journalist inquiries and stuff, and I can make my own pitches. And I've had some good success with that. I do my own
Amazing.
email marketing. I do my own socials. I have a girl that helps a little bit with some videos for socials, which is good, but largely I'm doing that all myself. Customer services is quite straightforward as well. And so actually, I've kind of, I don't use the PR agency anymore. The only thing that I really, that's the big cost that I still have on top of the warehouse is my advertising agency, because they're really good creatively, and they know how to do it. And I just don't have any interest in learning it. Like it really bores me. And
Yeah.
so I think I would rather pay somebody to do all of that for me. And actually then it kind of, the juggle works quite well because I only really work school hours now. Because that was the other thing actually that I found when we were really growing. I was working sort of around before the kids were up, in the evenings after they'd gone to bed. And
Yeah.
there was a period of time where I was really just working a lot, and I wasn't really seeing friends and family. Everything was very much about the business. And I think sort of last year I took stock and thought, I want to do this, but I want it to fit around my life. And I didn't want the kids to be in after school clubs unless they wanted to, which they generally don't want to do the clubs that are at school, annoyingly. So I don't get the longer
Always
day,
the
but
way.
I know, exactly. But they do a lot of activities outside of school. So I tend to pay taxi service to all of those. And I want to be the one that's doing that and be the one that's around for them. So I think that all kind of came to a head at the same time where I thought I need to make this work for me. And actually, now I have a really lovely balance
I love
where
that.
it's a really good lifestyle business, I think there's a huge opportunity to scale it in future if I want to, but at the moment, that's not necessarily right for me. And I mean, this summer, because my husband also runs his own business, but he's got a huge team, so he has flexibility in a different way. But we're taking the children to Vietnam and Thailand for 5 weeks backpacking, and we can do
Life
that because
goals.
I know, and it's such an incredible position to be in because I can do a load of work. I've got a lot to do before we break up in 5 weeks' time, but
Well,
I
again,
know
there's always a
it's a little bit.
sacrifice of something.
Exactly. But I know that I can plan a lot of things in advance for those 5 weeks that we're away. I can take my iPad with me so I can deal with customer services inquiries every day. And everything else is just dealt with. And for me, like that is just such a perfect setup. And so yeah, I
That
think
is
I will
amazing.
probably look at it again in the next few years. But
Yeah.
at the moment, although I don't have little tiny ones anymore, so my youngest is 8 now, nearly 9. But the challenges are just different. We're
Yeah.
juggling lots of activities and clubs and whatnot.
And I hear from friends with teenagers, sometimes they go through a bad phase and you just want to be around so they have that option
Mm.
to talk because it's like they're not talking as much as my 3 and 5 year olds who just tell me
Yeah,
everything. And it's like if you're more around, they're more likely to say, okay, actually this happened and I'm a bit feeling
yeah,
a bit miserable about it, which I hear because I think
exactly.
some people base that hope that they'll have more time in the teen years and it's not necessarily the case, sadly,
Yes, exactly. They just
depending.
need you in a different way.
Yeah. And oh, thank you for sharing that. I'm so excited for your holiday. And I think it's a really good
Yeah.
point because I also had a bit of a restructure and took the opportunity. I had a VA and personal, I've got people who support me in other ways in the team, but I got to a point where I needed some help in the home rather than the VA. And it kind of seemed like having two was a bit of a luxury at this point.
Mm.
And it does lead you to other opportunities. It sounds like the smart thing you've done is when the person supporting you took their full-time job, it's like, okay, well, I can really do with fulfillment and advertising because they don't interest me and I want my house back kind of
Yeah.
thing. So I think that's
Yeah.
really smart.
Yeah, definitely. I think what works for each small business is different, but it's difficult because I think we're sort of again, I suppose goes back a bit to the idea of being sold a lie. Maybe that's a bit too harsh in this case, but you get this idea that when you run a business, it's a negative thing to not want it to be huge. And when I started out, I was like, this is going to be massive. We're going to take it internationally, and it's going to be huge. And I still think it could be. I think it absolutely is a scalable business. Um, but it's just not the right time for me. And actually, I feel okay about saying that. Whereas I
Yeah.
didn't necessarily at first because I thought, oh, am I like letting the side down? I should be this like amazing entrepreneur doing this, that, and the other. But actually, yeah, that's just not where I'm at. And maybe, like I say, in a few years' time, hopefully, if I've kept the momentum on the business well enough, and that is difficult sometimes when you're on your own, then we can get to a place where we go, right, let's ramp this up now,
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
with a bit more cash in the business than I've got at the moment as well, because I'm sort of not spending everything. So
Small business realities there. And
it
I
is,
love that. I
yeah.
think hearing more about lifestyle businesses and it being okay to be a lifestyle business, I think that is hugely valuable because I think I've seen lots of stuff about that online recently of like, if I have a business that's making this amount of money for years and not going for the growth at this point, but doing it
Yeah.
maybe, being open to it. And
Mm.
I think something that's also really, something to note as well is like you've got a lot of charity partnerships there. And that's what I love as well about the women on this podcast is like we may not be having huge businesses, but we're still trying to make the world a better place, whether it's circular economy or like, yeah, like I said, giving back to those who need it. And you've got some really good partnerships, don't you?
Yeah, so we work predominantly with Kicks Count and then also with Copperfield. So Copperfield is the breast cancer awareness charity. And I think I had seen in some bras that I own that they do some these sort of reminder labels about checking your breasts for lumps. And so because when you're pregnant, your boobs are changing a lot when you're pregnant and breastfeeding. And obviously you're also really distracted because there's lots of other things going on in your life. I just felt that was quite an important reminder for mums to have. So we have a Copperfield label in all of our bras and some information that we send out on how to check yourself for unusual lumps. And I think breast cancer in mums that are pregnant and a year postpartum is quite rare. I think the statistic from memory is something like about 1 in 3,000. But
Oh, wow.
actually, since starting the business, I have been contacted by a good handful of mums to whom that has happened. And
Wow.
whenever they see that, we have these Copperfield reminder labels, that they're always like, that's such an amazing thing because this did actually happen to me. So that's just sort of an awareness spreading message. And then with Kicks Count, so if people aren't familiar with Kicks Count, it's a charity that encourages mums to monitor their baby's movements in their pregnancies with the aim of reducing the rates of stillbirth in the UK. Fantastic small charity. They're always, struggling for funding like many small charities are, but the work they do is invaluable. And I knew about Kicks Count in my pregnancies. I did in my second pregnancy get admitted for, reduced movements, which thankfully were fine. But it was just another charity that I sort of felt really obviously resonated with my audience, but also was one that we could really support. So we have Kicks Count reminder labels in all of our leggings and shorts. We sell their wristbands on the website as well. So that money obviously goes directly to them. You can donate to the charity through the website when you make a purchase. So we get lots of people that put a couple of extra pounds in, which is
Amazing.
never huge sums every month, but it's a small amount. And then I launched probably 2 years ago now a pre-loved scheme. So our customers, all of our clothing can be worn all the way through pregnancy and as long as you want to wear it afterwards. But I absolutely recognize that for some people, you don't necessarily, even if they fit, want to still wear what you deem to be maternity clothing
Yeah.
once you've had the baby. So we will buy back old Natal Active gear from our customers, and I pay a £10 gift card for the first item and £5 for subsequent items. So they can obviously gift that to somebody else or use it for a purchase. And we then resell the pre-loved clothing. So usually we've done it on the website. I have got 3 boxes of pre-loved stuff here that I need to sort out because we're actually going to start doing it through Vinted.
Oh,
So rather than
amazing.
doing, because now we have the fulfillment warehouse, it just makes it more complicated. So I thought, right, if I do it on Vinted, my plan is to get this sorted before the summer, but I feel like I keep telling people it's coming, and I haven't had a chance to do it yet. But then we can kind of keep adding to it rather than it being, right, we're launching the big sale now.
Yeah.
And we can always have sort of a run of pre-loved clothing on Vinted that people
That's
can purchase.
amazing. Oh, I
And then
think we
all
could
the funds
businesses did
raised
it.
from that go, yeah, all the funds raised from that will go to Kicks Count as well. So
Oh, fantastic. And it just shows like the power of small businesses. That's why everyone should support people like you because we are also,
yeah.
it's not just your amazing business, but also you're trying to do great things with it as well.
Yeah, and it's small amounts, but it's just trying to do something really and help profile and awareness as well.
Oh, well, Claire, honestly, thank you so much. It's no mean feat starting. I have such respect for product-based businesses because I feel like it is so hard to get launched and everything you guys go through. So what would if we could just end on like, what are your top 3 tips if there's a woman, a mother sat here being like, I've really got this idea for a clothing brand. I think it's got legs. How can they take it from being the person with the idea to actually trying it?
Yeah, I think firstly you've got to be really clear about what your niche is. So, in my case, activewear is a hugely saturated market. And so my focus was very much on maternity and on breastfeeding as a niche because that was an area that was underserved. Actually, we've subsequently launched normal, for want of a better word, postnatal leggings and non-breastfeeding
Okay.
bras, but actually that's not a core part of the business because you've got
Yeah.
to focus on your niche. And I think talk to people to really understand what it is that they want. So depending on what problem it is that you're trying to solve for people, and then really just do lots of research. I think it's so important to have good manufacturers. That's such a key thing, and it can be really difficult to find because people are very understandably very protective of their manufacturers, so it's not like you necessarily get recommendations.
Yes.
And I think I was really fortunate because I was never able to visit my manufacturers because of COVID and travel restrictions. And in fact, they're actually coming over here next month to see me, and I am going over to China in the summer when we do our big backpacking tour. I'm leaving my husband for the kids with the kids for a couple of days and heading over to see the clothing in
Amazing.
production in person, because there's just no substitute for that. And it's so important to have good relationships with the manufacturers.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think that would be, I mean, it's just really sampling and just getting advice from as many people as possible on the design process, the manufacturing process. I'm still learning new things all the time. I'm by no means an expert, even 4 years on. So
I think we're all constantly learning, aren't we, in this small business world? No, thank you for sharing, because we are all learning and you never stop learning. I think that's the beauty of getting older, is you start to realize this whole thing is just one big learning journey in life.
absolutely, absolutely.
Claire, thank you so much for coming on today. Where can people find you and to find out more and buy some of your products?
Oh, thank you for having me, Caroline. So, yeah, natalactive.com is our website, and we're also Natal Active on Instagram. So, Instagram I use for lots of kind of sharing lots of videos of different mums wearing our products. They're really nice and inspirational. And then you can also follow us on TikTok, which is a little bit more behind the scenes. So,
Will it have your travels on TikTok?
maybe. I'm always a little bit careful about showing my kids on
Yes.
socials. They pop up a little bit occasionally. But yes, I probably will be doing something, because I think it's quite interesting to see how it'd be quite a nice thing to show how you kind of can flexibly run a business and go and do something amazing like traveling. So undoubtedly, but I'm terrible because I film lots of content and then never end up finding the
Ah,
time to
yes.
use it. So I'm determined to get better at that.
No, and I can't wait. We should have it on a mini episode of like, okay, so how did the
Yes.
travels go?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Claire. Absolute pleasure. And wish you luck for your travels over the next few months.
Thank you very much. And thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to Bump to Business Owner. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please do rate, review, follow, or subscribe wherever you're listening. It really helps us to connect with more mums and business owners. You can DM me on @BumpToBusinessOwner on Instagram, and I'll be back next week.